Welcome to the latest episode of the Undiscovered Metric with me, JJ Haig. Today I'm joined by Cam Benoit, Team Leader of Solutions Consulting at Adverity, to discuss all things data, agency requirements for data reporting, and how they can optimize these for clients. Thanks for joining me, Cam. Really looking forward to deep diving into this. Just before we get started into the real questions, and can you just give me a little bit of a background into your role and career?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've done a bunch of different roles, but I've been primarily a solution consultant. So what I normally do is I help folks look at their technology and their strategy associated with that, and I help them choose the right tool for their specific scenario. I've also worked on some of the largest, I've been the technical project leader on some of the largest data processing and data mining implementations in the entire world. So there's some misadventures with those, and there's some really good memories with those that I'm kind of happy to share today.
Jumping right into it, we obviously as Adverity did a piece of research last year that found the number of data sources that 99% of CMOs are now looking at has grown to 10, 52% of which are actually looking at over 14 data sources to compile all of their data. So if you're an agency and you've got multiple client requirements for reporting, how can they sort of manage all of these data requirements with so many data touch points? And what are the metrics that they need to be looking at to really prove value for their clients?
Yeah, JJ, so you're absolutely right. And this is what we're seeing with most of the folks that I'm working with right now. So there's a ton of new data sources, and managing this across all of your different clients seems like the work is kind of exponentially growing with every new source and every new client in these scenarios. But the nice part is that most of the people are still using the same stuff. You know, maybe they're using a TikTok connector now. Maybe they're using a new version of an old API or something that they're using to collect all of this data. But that core, maybe 6 or 7 data sources is staying the same. And it's really nice because, kind of answer the second part of that question, if you're using things with reusable automations, what you're able to do is essentially automate and reuse about 80% of what a new client would need, and you want to seek out similar clients to the ones that you've already had. But when you have that chunk of 80% already set up in your data pipeline, you can kind of clone that up into a new client, and then you kind of build out the cute 20% a little bit later on for yourself. So it does feel like a really daunting task, but if you have the right automation set up, and if you have the right abilities to reuse a lot of the elements that you've currently built out, it becomes much easier just to kind of do that little niche part at the end.
And I suppose it allows people to grow at scale, and it allows people to grow quickly. They're future-proofing their business almost.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in kind of talking about the dimension element to that as well, is just that if you're able to get into some of these deeper dimensions as well with some of the new data sources, that's really going to be something that we found to be useful. You can't always predict where the needle in the haystack is going to be. So what we found is that if you have any new dimensional breakdown that you can get in a report, and you can add that as a filter on a dashboard, or you could add that to, instead of just having one KPI box with a number, maybe breaking that out into different bars on a bar chart, just to see the different elements of your business. It allows you to get a little bit deeper and understand all those elements a little bit more effectively than just kind of doing those high-level vanity metrics that we're seeing some folks doing right now.
One of the things that's come up quite a lot through this series so far is naming conventions. Now, I don't know where you sit on this with sort of all of the different data sources having different data naming conventions, but how can agencies sort of get around that challenge as well, as we say, with the number of data sources changing and everyone calling reach and engagement slightly different things or measuring it in slightly different ways?
Yeah, and I think there's, the first portion of that is doing the element of schema mapping. So if you have, everyone calls something, everyone has their special name for something. Google calls it cost, Facebook calls it spend. So the idea of schema mapping is just getting each of those columns into the exact same naming convention. So later on, when you're visualizing and you're doing analysis on the data across all of those data sources, you have the exact same name that you're working with, right? So in your BI tool, you can then say, hey, I want to do my costs by all of my data sources, and I want all to line up, right? So that's something where if you have a little bit more of a mature data pipeline, that's something that's gonna help you out later on with actually visualizing the data. And the other part of what you're kind of talking about is the naming conventions. So when you don't have one of the dimensions in an API or a defined report that you have right out of the box, what I like to do is just extend that naming convention a little bit longer, add on whatever is really critical to your business that you already know about that campaign. You can essentially split out that portion of the campaign later on, and then create that as a new filter on the dashboard. So you're not limited to just the kind of the basic information that everyone gets from each one of these APIs today.
And once a sort of client and a team have got those naming conventions in place, what are the key sort of data questions that clients should be asking, both to agencies and to themselves of their data? What are the things that they should really be looking at?
Yeah, and I think this is a really critical part of creating data pipelines that people probably don't do enough. A lot of people probably know that it could be better, but they might not be asking the exact questions on what's going to bridge the gap from where they are today and where they want to be in the future. So I do have a couple questions I'll probably list off here, but the first one is, how easy is this to change for 200 of my clients, for example? Not everyone has 200 clients, but the idea of change management can be very time consuming. Say there's a change in one of the APIs bringing in information, or one of your data sources changes the name of a column, or maybe it's formatting something in a slightly different way, which is something that happens relatively often. You really want to go in and figure out how much time it's going to take for you to change all these things. And if there's an automated way for you to maybe make one update in one place, but then also have that one update like 200 connected clients to that one configuration. So that's really the first one where you really want to make sure that this can scale, and you're not spending all of your time clicking into 200 different clients and making one different change. So you want to set yourself up for success early. The second one is, how easy is it to add a new client onto this pipeline? We were talking about cloning earlier, and when you have the ability to copy and paste 80% of what someone's used before, then you're way ahead of a lot of other folks that are kind of rebuilding out each one of these pipelines. So you really want to be able to reuse things from other clients. And then second portion of that is, you want to be building new automations on top of what you've reused, right? So if one client comes up with an idea, maybe that's something that another client would use in the future. So if you create that in a way that you can copy and paste up and down, these are going to be really critical aspects to scaling up your business and not wasting too much time on repetitive processes. A third question that I think some folks should probably ask a little bit more as well is, what is my team actually spending their time doing, right? So understanding, am I doing a daily process just to kind of keep the lights on and keep the status quo? Or is my team actively building out things that are really enticing my clients and being incredibly interesting for them, in making it more relevant to their scenario? And then I think I had a couple lists of these. So there's two more questions. So the second to last one would be, where's the root of the problem, right? So there's some people that can kind of say, hey, these are the vanity metrics, we've done our job. But when you go out and you take some more specific data from that exact business, and you could relate that to a strategic initiative that maybe your CEO has set out this year. That's something that's immediately going to be useful and a lot more valuable than if you're just posting all of the data directly from an API or a data source, and not really making it relevant and connecting that to the real world. And we talk a lot about automating these processes and making them faster and making sure on the day-to-day we're only building new automations. But this is that one scenario where I'm actually happy to say, hey, if we have one person once a month come in and do a manual upload of some CSV file or something that makes this perfectly relevant, or it maps in what makes this relevant to the end consumer of the data, I found that to be much more effective than making that dashboard immediately relevant and useful and easy to understand is far more effective than having to try to explain that to people. And those types of dashboards that need more explanations aren't necessarily going to be successful throughout your business, because most of the folks aren't actually going to have the explanation of how to use it, why it's relevant. So you really need to be building all of those things in. And then the last one is just, does all of this stuff still work if I'm doing this with one of my largest real world use cases, right? You have no idea if this stuff's going to break until you actually test it out, right? So I don't love the phrase, hey, we want to kick the tires, because that's really with software, that is not good enough. You really got to take the Mustang to the racetrack to make sure that you can beat all of your friends, right? That's the idea, instead of just kind of looking at a few things. Things really need to be tested out.
That's such a great overview, and I think perhaps a lot of the time clients may be asking one or two of those questions, but not thinking about how all of these fit into the wider puzzle to make sure that everything's working. Just on that as well, do you feel that there's sometimes a lack of people looking at what are the core business objectives they're trying to get out of sort of their data before they go into it? So they're running before they can walk a little bit, rather than saying, actually, let's sit down methodically. These are the reasons why we're doing this. This is what we want to achieve, and this is how we're going to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the end consumer should really be someone that's understanding each one of the limitations and what's being built currently. And they should definitely be giving feedback and working with the people that are actually building these dashboards. So the end result that they're looking for is actually what you get. And this is something we've talked about with the idea of no code development for a really long time, where if you have the engineer and you have the person who has the problem, and the person who has the problem writes up their requirements, they throw it over the theoretical brick wall in between them, and the engineer says, oh, okay, I'll build this out. And they throw the application back over, and the first person says, hey, this is nothing like I wanted it to be, right? So what's nice about using some of the no-code tools that are available today, or working more directly with the engineers when you need to do more of that, those deep dives into the really technical stuff, is that we can get much closer to exactly what we want. We can improve the status quo, and we can kind of keep building off of those things in the future.
And so once you've got your KPIs, you've answered the questions that we've just talked about, and you're now looking at the data. How are the metrics sort of grouped and reported on? How as an end user are you going to sort of see that data and make sure that it's actionable?
I think the one example we gave before is, instead of just putting a filter on a dashboard, what you can really do is break the data out where it's already a little bit pre-filtered, right? I'm not a fan of, hey, our click-through rate is this number this month, right? That's not helpful, because you see it goes down maybe a little bit, but realistically, you might be having one massive problem in one section of the business instead of seeing that overall drop. So I think where we want to group these and where we want to make them a little bit more valuable is really just making sure that we're making a few decisions up front to say, hey, these these are the top level dimensions we want to focus on. And then you can kind of drill into those later on as well. I also did I'm glad we're talking about, grouping and organizing, transforming data as well, because I gave a presentation in Dallas recently where it was called "You're Not That Special," right? And it raised a few eyebrows, but the main idea was the beginning of a lot of these marketing pipelines are not very unique, right? A lot of them have very similar data sources. And maybe it's a new data source like TikTok, like we were talking about before, but the second portion, collecting the data, isn't that unique. But the second portion of transforming it, making it relevant, similar to, hey, my boss just told me that I needed to start tracking this, so let me rename all of these fields so it's immediately valuable, immediately relevant. And all of those types of things are made possible by shifting around the data, cutting it up, reorganizing it. And those are definitely capabilities that people should be looking into when they're kind of defining what they want to do with the data pipeline.
I think a lot of people look at this probably quite dauntingly starting at that beginning of their data journey, but it doesn't have to be as scary as people sort of sometimes make out.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think when you're working with the right tools and you've thought about these things, there's a lot of really good articles online about how we can start to organize a data pipeline where it doesn't have to be all manual work with everything with different names, every manual step every single morning while you're drinking your coffee, trying to fix all of your data before a certain time because you have a meeting later on. Those types of ideas of manual processing are things that we really need to leave behind. When we're automating these types of things and we're guaranteeing essentially that it's getting done every single morning before we even wake up, those are the things that are going to kind of help us long term.
Just talking a little bit about the metrics, are there any that you see as the sort of really undiscovered, undervalued metrics that people should look out on? We've talked a lot on this podcast series so far about vanity metrics, Meta giving them out, Instagram, TikTok, all of these views and lovely shiny numbers that you can present, but not necessarily actually giving you the cut through. Are there any that you really highlight?
Yeah, I think the tough part and kind of the theme of this show so far is just the idea that we don't necessarily know what we don't know at this point. We don't know what's going to happen in the future. And for me, in my past, the most important metric usually wasn't scoped out or defined on day one. So the most important metric is usually the one that someone says, hey, now I get the project. Now I understand what you guys can do, but let's expand the scope a little bit. I really need to look into this one specific thing. And that's why it's so critical to build your data pipelines in a more automated, reusable way. So instead of focusing on just doing all of that work every single day, you have the ability to kind of build and improve and work off of that and make sure that's a new automation in your data pipeline. So that person has all of their data to the spec that they kind of needed to be at.
That's a really nice thought in terms of there are things that can still surprise you, even if you've got this very rigid idea of what you want to get out of your data.
Yeah, and I think the larger point there is you don't want to rabbit hole yourself with your technology, right? You need to be asking those questions that we talked about before to ensure that you have that flexibility later on. I've seen a lot of data pipelines get 60% to where they want to be. And then they say, oh, well, we really need to do this halfway through the project. And they say, well, we might need to get a different tool that can scale a little bit more effectively or use some of those elements of reusability that we're talking about before.
It sounds like a lot of people have similar business problems with a lot of projects. I think hopefully the automation of data is going to sort of solve that for a lot of people. I just want to move on to working with multiple data sources, because obviously, as we touched upon at the beginning, this is a big thing. And I know you spoke about sort of naming conventions, but just to see if there are any common mistakes that you're seeing people make when they're working with multiple data sources and any things that they can do to sort of avoid those pitfalls.
Yeah, I think one of the major mistakes that I'm seeing is that people are getting all of their data and then they're doing a lot of the transformations much closer to the visualization section. So what I would suggest is, instead of every time you go to build a visualization in Tableau or Power BI, some of these folks are having to join, 4 or 5 different tables to get a visualization with different data sources in it, right? So what I'd suggest is, if you do your homework earlier on, that's going to be something that's really going to support you later on, because, hey, maybe all of this could be one campaign performance report for all of my data sources. Now I'm just pointing to that one table in my BI tool, and that's going to make it much easier and faster for me to build out these visualizations later on. We're also seeing, and this is, I'm glad you brought up multiple data sources, because there is also still a large amount of people, and it still surprises me, where they have that one-to-one relationship between a data source and a dashboard, right? You really shouldn't be having just a Facebook dashboard right now, but not be comparing that to your other tools, right? There might be a large amount of cost savings or differences in return on investment, where you're comparing, Facebook to the newcomer TikTok. TikTok, in some of the analysis that we've done, has been, maybe half the price for twice as much of the benefit in some of these scenarios, just because a lot of people are afraid to kind of shift into a new tool. But when you set that up, when you combine all that information together, you get a view and you say, hey, maybe I should try out this new tool. And it also makes you very flexible. So if you want to try a new tool, well, you can connect to it. If you link it up to all of the data you already have linked up, then you can just add that into some of the visualizations that you have right now. And while you're testing it, you can actually see, hey, my click-through rate is actually much higher on this tool. Let's continue to invest in it until it kind of plateaus. And this was a good idea to start testing out different platforms.
Our CMO always says, without data, an opinion is just an idea. And it seems that you need that historical data to be able to link together to actually prove what you're trying to do, rather than just, oh, cool, maybe it was working, maybe it wasn't. It's just an opinion, isn't it?
Yeah, and I speak to a lot of CFOs that have explained that similar idea to me, where as a marketer, you can really focus in on a new platform or an old platform where you've kind of built your career on. But until you have the actual numbers, at the end of the day, marketing efforts come down to, hey, what's the financial cost and what's the financial benefit? So simplifying those types of things down is really valuable to the financial folks. On the other side, we want to be promoting brand awareness and all the non-financial aspects. But the people who are sometimes signing off on a lot of this stuff really need to see those numbers. And if you can explain to them, hey, now we're going to be able to save X amount of dollars because we're going to cut Facebook down a little bit. I think Facebook is way too overpopulated. I think it's a wonderful tool, but way too overpopulated right now. We'll cut a little bit on Facebook and we'll up another tool and just kind of do testing on these other tools for a little bit. Your whole strategy becomes 10 times more agile. And as a business, you're not missing out on these new opportunities.
And the basis of our conversation today, do you think that this is one of the only ways forward in terms of highlighting marketing efforts? Our research last year showed that it's a significant challenge that CMOs have, is justifying and proving marketing value to the rest of the business. Is this the cornerstone of how they can sort of overcome that challenge? Absolutely.
And I think getting that into one simple, easy to use dashboard that just automatically gets all of the data every single day is one of the only ways that you're going to gain that trust. And kind of explaining where that data came from in each element, and the fact that, hey, this is why we need a little bit more money, and this is going to make us more revenue in the future because we've tried this, we've tested this. Those types of things are really going to give you a little bit more leverage, a little bit more data, and just kind of drive your goals and your initiatives. So very exciting stuff that a lot of folks are starting to do this really well. And I'm kind of excited to see in the future that the marketing team is going to get a little bit more of a say with the C-suite in a lot of these conversations where, hey, maybe we're not just investing specifically in people doing certain sales efforts or certain things that might not be working as much all the time. Maybe they have a little bit more of a say at the table because they say, hey, this is the efficiency of what I'm presenting versus other tactics.
You touched upon there a lot about marketing in the future and automation of data. Are there any things that you think are really going to catch fire over the next 18 months people should be prioritizing or starting to look at in the industry or outside of marketing industry, actually?
So I think the very popular one right now is with ChatGPT and more auto-generated content, if you will. But I think that trend is going to go up. I think if someone's not using those types of tools to at least give themselves a starting point or improve what they're thinking right now, they're missing out and they're going to be less competitive. So the more auto-generated content, the inputs are definitely going to rise. And I think because of the automation on that side, we also need to be automating the actual tracking of how these campaigns are doing. Hey, what's a ChatGPT assisted campaign where it's all of their content? How's that doing versus what a normal content writer is actually doing, right? The normal content writer might be 10 times more effective and we have absolutely no idea. So we need to get these things, it's wonderful to have the automated inputs, but in the future, if we don't understand if they're working or if they're not working, that's going to be a huge problem. So I think people are they're going to realize that they need to, hey, maybe things aren't so perfect when I automate all of my content creation. Maybe, we do need a really personalized approach to doing this and kind of creating more of those raw relationships with clients. And that kind of goes into the second thing that I'm kind of predicting here. So the good old fashioned organic marketing is something that a lot of brands haven't fully dove into. Or the main point here is that if you were able to be the encyclopedia of your industry, where someone goes and they're learning about your industry, so they're already interested and they're looking for some definition or a technique, and the definition, and there might be a video on your website that's allowing that person to learn even more. And then maybe there's a link to another video, and then second step, and you're educating them about all of these things and how to do this with your tools. I think that is entirely overlooked right now. So I definitely think organic marketing is something that's going to be much more popular in the future, just because it's also so cost effective. There are so many executives out there that have such incredible opinions, and actually just regular users and people who are building the products, and really so many elements of each organization where they're not utilizing everyone to the top tier of their ability. But I think maybe if the market gets squeezed a little bit more, they're going to start saying, hey, your job description just expanded to making a video once a week on the best way to use our product. And then the third one would be more influencers doing that for companies too. So for example, on Instagram, there's a macro friendly recipe that a person who's really in shape and their fitness instructor and dietitian uses. And it just so happens I can only get these ingredients at Trader Joe's. So through this influencer, I'm saying, hey, he's accomplished the goal that I wanted to accomplish. He's given me his secret recipe for doing this, and then he's giving me the place to go ahead and make this purchase. So it just so happens to be this exact company. And I think that recipe needs to kind of be used more so in the future, because every day I feel like a lot of people are sitting on their couch at the end of the day, and there's a good comedian who's made a joke about this, where they have the TV screen in the back, and then they have their phone, and maybe they're doing a little bit of work on their computer, and then the kid brings in an iPad to ask him how to complete a game, and you could be having 4 different ads on at the same exact time. And maybe one of those is hitting into something that really resonates with you, right? So I think that to kind of round that up is just that the influencers are going to definitely have a little bit more of the market share of what people are spending on their marketing budget. And I think we're going to see that those things are really effective in the future when they're done correctly with that kind of strategy I just outlined.
It sounds very much like we're moving into an era of adding value, not noise. And that shift certainly from organic to paid, where paid is very, everyone knows it's paid, whereas organic needs to add that value for people to sort of interact with it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is there any sort of advice that you would pass on to our listeners, and anything that you sort of wish you had known when you were slightly younger in this industry, or the sort of the tidbits of wisdom that you want to pass on?
I think the biggest piece, so when people ask me for any type of advice or what I wish I would have done before, is read the book Managing Oneself by Peter Drucker. Who's a very famous business consultant. This is an older book, but it's very short, very readable. And the main thing that he says is you can't improve what you don't track. So when you start to, if your goal is to do more push-ups, you need to figure out where you're at today and if you're actually doing more push-ups, right? Those very simple things in your life and in business are things that can easily be written down or tracked. And the second part of it is, try to automate as much of that tracking as you can as well, right? So when it kind of comes full circle, you don't want to be spending your time tracking all this stuff and doing documentation, and no one likes filling in their hours for work or those types of things. What we want to be doing is trying to fix those new problems and start tracking those new problems and automatically kind of having this feedback loop of every day trying to improve ourselves.
That also sounds like a great way to tie up our entire conversation about data as well. You can't improve what you don't track.
Yeah, and that's a terrific book. And I think it kind of gave me a little bit more of that alignment that I needed to just kind of stay a little bit more organized in my daily life, right? So when you're noticing that you're doing something every single day that's very manual, there's the technology out there today to automate the vast majority of this. So you can use all the brain power on those new issues and kind of keep beating up the status quo.
Awesome. Cam, it's been an absolute pleasure. Really, really appreciate your time, and thank you so much for all your insights.
Yeah, it's been great talking to you, JJ. I'm looking forward to any other future conversations that we have.